Hello everybody, so this is your Unit 2 test review. I put it in cursive and block lettering just in case you don't speak cursive. So on your review, it's a little bit different than the ones we've done in the past. It doesn't have an I do, we do because you are working on this by yourself, so you are doing the whole thing. So reviewing domain and range, remember domain is your X, range is your Y. Whenever we begin writing, we always write it the same way. So domain begins with X, range begins with Y. For domain, we're going to go from left to right. So our furthest left is -3. Notice that there's an open circle at -3, so we will not put equal to. And to the right is +1, and it's a closed circle, so we would put or equal to 1. For our range, we're going to go from least to greatest, so that's bottom to top. So our lowest value is here. Closed dot at -4, so we'll put or equal to. And then our highest value is here at 0. And although we have an open dot on the left, we do have somewhere where it's closed, so we will put or equal to 0. You will do the same thing on number 4 as number 1. So you'll use the same steps here as we did for number 1. For number 2, we have domain and range. Again, so domain is our X's. On this graph, as we travel to the left, if I try to draw a line here, I can't because notice there's an arrow. So there's going to be an arrow. It's going to continue, the graph will continue on to the left. So there is no barrier to the left. To the right, it appears that I can draw it here, but again, we have an arrow. So since there are no boundaries to the left and the right, it's going to keep going. Both directions. Our solution for domain is all real numbers. Now for range, we have our graph here ending, but there are arrows that keep going. And up at the top, we do have a boundary at 3. So y can be anything less than or equal to 3. Now for this one, you're going to do the same thing on number 2 and 5. So 5 is going to have same steps as this one over here. Number 3. Which equation can be used to create this table of values? So we have to see what is our rate of change. Remember, from a table, we look at the change in y divided by the change in x. So we're going to be using our equation y equals mx plus b. M is our slope. B is our y-intercept. So our slope, that's equal to my change in y divided by my change in x. In this case, my change in y is plus 10. My change in x is plus 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. My slope is 5. I can go ahead and fill in my m value. Now for our y-intercept, remember the y-intercept is when x equals 0. And in this case, we don't have that in our table, but we can go backwards. Since it's adding 2 each time on the left, this would be -2. And on the right, it's adding 10 each time. So this would be minus 10, which would give us 30. So our y-intercept will be plus 30. And there's our equation. Now, just like we did this on the left, we'll do that again on the right. Now, number 7. The table shows the amount of money made by a summer blockbuster each of the first 4 weeks in its theater release. M is a function of W. What is the domain of the function? Typically, we relate domain as with X, but since we don't have X for either of our values, we need to think about what is our independent value. What would be our X? And in this case, the weeks are independent because the money depends on the weeks. So our domain would be 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 8, which equation is graphed? Remember, we're using our form y equals mx plus b. So if we find this, our y-intercept, which is also our starting point, it's right here at 4. Positive. And then we can just find our slope. So on this graph, our slope is going from 4 to 8, that's plus 4, and then over 2. So that's 4 over 2, which is 2. Slope is 2. Remember to put your x plus 4. That's our equation. On number 9, it says to sketch this graph. So keeping in mind what we just discussed, your y-intercept is your starting point. So we're going to start at positive 2. And then our slope is our rise over the run. So our slope is down 2 and over 5. So down 2 over 5. Put your dot there, and then just draw your line. So going up to the top of the next page, we said it's going to be the same step, so let's go ahead and just make sure that you're getting the correct answer here. So our domain is our x values. Remember, we start our inequalities the same. That's the furthest left and the furthest right on our graph. So in this case, it goes from 0 and it can equal to 7 and it can equal. Our range is our y values. Again, we start the same way. That's our least value on the y-axis to our highest value on the y-axis. So it goes from -2 to +4, and it can equal both. Number 5 has arrows, so it's a little bit different. We have our domain, which is x, and our range, which is y. So for our domain, if we try to draw a barrier, you can see that that arrow is going to cross over. So our domain is going to keep going to the right and the left. We cannot draw an endpoint, so that's -infinity to +infinity. Remember that an answer choice will say all real numbers. And then for our range, that's our lowest value. In this case, we can draw a lowest point on the y-axis. That's 0, and it can equal. But then as we keep going up, it doesn't have a barrier. It's going to keep going. So that's to positive infinity. On a test, it will say y is greater than or equal to 0, because it can be anything above 0. Number 6, again, we're using the same steps as we did on the other side. So the first step is to find our rate of change, and then to find our y-intercept. So it's kind of flip-flop from a graph. So our rate of change, our slope is our change in y divided by our change in x. You can choose any one that you want. So I will pick these points here because it's the least numbers to count. So 9 to 11 is plus 2, and 3 to 4 is plus 1. So change in y over change in x is 2. And then we need to find our y-intercept. So to go backwards from 1 to 0 is minus 1 to get to 0 here, which is half of this 2. So whenever I go back from this -1, half of this 1 is a half. So that's -1 1/2. So then we'll write our equation, y equals, and our slope was 2x, and then our y-intercept was -1 1/2, so that'll be minus 1 1/2 is 1.5. Okay, number 14 says, what is the range of the following function whenever the domain is this? Remember, domain is your x's, so all of these values here are going to get plugged in for this x. We can do it in table form. That's probably the easiest. So if you make a table with your x values, and then the range is your y values. Remember, y is the same as f of x. So if we plug in our domain, -2, 0, and 2, let me make this table a little bit different, kind of similar to one of the assignments we just had. So we'll have our x, and then we'll have our y, which is again the same as the f of x. And then we have our equation, -6x minus 4. So if our domain is -2, 0, and 2, we're going to plug in each one of those values for x. So we'll have -6, plug in our x value, -2 minus 4. So -6 times -2 is positive 12, minus 4 is 8. Remember, you can put this part in the calculator. -6 times 0 minus 4, -4. -6 times 2 minus 4 is -16. So the question says, what is the range? So our range is these values that we found on the right side. -16, -4, and 8. So it's like you solve the equation 3 times. Number 15. Given this function, what is the value of f of negative 1? Remember we said that that means the x is being replaced by that number. So we'll write our equation, negative 6, and instead of the x, we'll put the value they gave us. And then when you solve, you should get negative 134. And lastly, we have our graph that we're finding the value on. Again, this is representing f of x. X is replaced with negative 1. So whenever x is negative 1, the value is positive 2. Another example here would be f of 2. That's whenever x equals 2. What's the answer? So we would go over to x equals 2, and then we would go up to check the value, and it is 8. So that would be your solution. Another example, f of negative 4. So that's whenever x is negative 4. We'll go over to negative 4, look down. Our value is negative 4 for the y as well. I hope that this helped you. Please be sure to go back and review any questions that you were confused about. And if you have any questions, make sure you see me before class. You can message me on Remind. Just to remind you, you can text at Mrs. Burns A1 to 81010. That's for the Remind. Or you can send me a message on Instagram. It's math_magicians. Let me know if you need any help. Bye, guys.